Well, welcome back, everyone. We had an absolutely phenomenal morning, very inspiring. So inspiring, I went and put my red lipstick on. So you all should do the same. I'm here today with two of Detroit's Manbassadors, Kevin Wirtz, CEO of Campbell Ewald, and James Ward. He's the Chief Strategy Officer at Donor. So many of you have seen your Manbassador bingo cards in your bags. You might want to take it out just as a reference. So what does it really mean to be a Manbassador? And I'm going to start out by asking you to finish this sentence for me. This topic is important to me because.
I mean, like a lot of what we heard this morning, the topic of, the whole point of the 3% conference is important to me for two reasons. One, I look at myself as a person first, and it feels like the right thing to do to have equal representation in the creative ranks and in leadership ranks in an agency. My parents were divorced. I was raised by a single mom, and I saw her work, and I saw what she went with at work, and that sort of influenced a lot of the personal side of me. And my dad was a business owner, and in the 70s, he would treat everyone fairly, and men and women alike. And so I always just grew up around that as a personal side of like, this is the right way to do things. And now, in my position at Campbell Ewald, I also understand that it's really good for business. And so it's the two sides of that for me.
Great.
I think, I think if you're alive and breathing in the year 2017, you got to look at gender inequality as kind of an affront to common sense and an affront to modernity. So that's the way I see it just in general. But kind of on a more personal level, what intensifies this issue for me is that I have three daughters. Shout out Isabel, Eloise, and Lila. And, if I didn't embrace this cause, it would make me a hypocrite and a bad dad. So when I think, they got to have to make their way through this world, and the notion that they'd, either could be constrained or disadvantaged just because they're women is intolerable.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So how do you feel you're doing as an agency with senior level gender diversity?
Well, I think we're a work in progress. Our CEO likes to say we're a work in progress and we're making progress, and I think that's pretty apt today. Happily, Donor's well represented here, and I know Eric talked a lot about the walkout we did. And, I think to just revisit that, that's a really good catalytic event, and sometimes we need that in the business we're in to sort of raise consciousness and get people talking about the issue. But having done that, what's really critical is that we follow through and live it every day. And I think through programs like mentorship, we have a D&I council. I think the agencies really, our consciousness has been raised, and I think people want to do the right thing. I don't think anybody ever wanted to do the wrong thing. I think just sometimes as men we can be a little bit oblivious. I think that's well known.
Was there anything specific you did right after that walkout?
We started what's called a Diversity Inclusion Council, Diversity and Inclusion. We have begun a mentorship program. There's research out there that suggests if you're a white guy, you're going to be more inclined to go seek out mentorship of your own accord. But when you provide mentorship as an institutional thing, the people who are most likely to take advantage of it are going to be minorities and women. So I think just the sheer act, I'm going to start mentoring a woman named Katie. She's not here right now, but shout out Katie if you're on social media. Just the sheer act of tearing down walls between people is really crucial. Obviously the theme of empathy has come up a lot today, and it's something we talk about as well, because diversity is great if you get different people in the room, but empathy is crucial, that we look into each other and figure out how to kind of understand how other people feel. I don't want to crowd out Kevin with my long answer.
Good answer. I think about gender equality at the agency. I look at it from a couple of perspectives. So, one, as an agency, we are, over 50% of our employee population is female. And that to me isn't success or failure, it's just sort of a fact. What we have, thankfully now, through a fair amount of change this past 12, 18 months is the same percentage of women in the workforce are in senior leadership roles at our agency. So success to me is not seeing a drop-off in senior leadership in the female ranks.
Right. Great. So the Manbassador card, there's a whole bunch of micro actions. Which ones do you feel you're doing well, and what would you like to do better?
Yeah, that was a really interesting tool. I pass it around to a lot of folks at the agency. I initially thought we'd be judged on that. Like if we said a bingo, like a wrong word, they would like call
Right.
us
It'd
be
out
like a buzzer.
drinking-
Or that
like
you-
a drinking game or
You
something.
do a shot when we say cliche, right?
You can use that in New York, Cat. It's a free one. I think, there's a handful of things that they think that are going pretty well that I think I do okay at, and then things that we need to improve. And the one I think about, in the role that I'm in at Campbell Ewald, I think about things like mentorship. I think of things about things like giving women a voice and a seat at the table. Those are all really important. But in my role, what I can do probably better than anything is be an advocate. Because if I can have more than a one-to-one relationship or interaction with my efforts, so if I can encourage other people, mid-level managers throughout our company to watch out for some of those other micro actions and take action and do things differently, I can have a greater than one-to-one impact than if I just did something personally. So I'd say advocate is the one that I think is probably going the best of the agency right now. And the one that I think that we need to work on is there's a couple around sort of quantification, and I think we talked about that this morning about like how do we keep track of these things and quantify what's going well and what's not going well. And what's interesting is that it hit me really interestingly when I saw that is that we do a good job of keeping track of who joins the agency, what level they're at, are they being paid fairly for an equal background, gender, et cetera, promotions, also who leaves the agency, why they're leaving, why when they're leaving. But what we haven't done is quantified that and said, are we losing more women in middle management and are they leaving for predominantly pay situations? We've not quantified that. We have all that data, we just never looked at it that way. And so Barb, our head of HR, is here, and so that's one of her new tasks is to keep track of that. But it's important to us because I believe if you can quantify it, you can measure, and if you can measure, you can benchmark and get better at it. So that's the one that we're going to try to improve at the agency.
No, that's great, and that married with the advocacy and the mentorship. So I think the point of the difference between advocacy or sponsorship and mentorship is really acute, and thinking about not just creating mentorship programs, but creating sponsorship programs.
I think that's right. I mean, when I looked at the bingo card, first I was intimidated by it, but then I think, I identify with being, the listener. I think in terms of my own interactions with female colleagues, I think I'm a good listener and empathetic, but I think I'd like to be a little bit more of the watchdog archetype because, like Kevin said, anything that counts has got to be counted. And so it's one thing to say philosophically we're about diversity and empathy, but how do you really count it? And to me, one of the things that I was just talking about this with someone last night. Someone mentioned free the bid earlier today, which I'd never heard of, but it's analogous to, in the NFL, I don't know if people know this, but there's a thing called the Rooney Rule, and they made it so that anytime there's a head coach opening or a senior operations opening, that teams are required to interview minority candidates. And I would say we do that, through no policy pretty well, but I think we could take a step further and really formalize the commitment to doing that because it's just little things like that, and mindfulness go a long way.
That's great. Well, good. So, you're both very involved in your agencies and really the conversation. How do we get more people involved, more men involved in the conversation?
It's a good question. I think about, to me, we do a lot of training at our agency, and constantly in agency folks, you'll all agree with this, is that we're being asked to do more with less. Our clients want to pay us less money typically than more, and they want more than less. And then on top of that, we pile on a lot of training. And I think to me, having other folks and men specifically take up this cause and do something about this to help change the ratio in the industry is to not think about this as training. We're not teaching somebody how to use a PowerPoint presentation or close a sale. We're asking them to think differently about, making sure women are represented fairly throughout our ranks of the agency and how that's good for business. And so, one of the ways that we're doing that is trying to not treat this like training. So we have a bunch of programming we're creating where we simultaneously get people out of their comfort zone, but in a comfortable space where they'd be open to learning new things. And so we've got a series we call Courageous Conversations, where we have panel discussions and we bring in folks and we tackle really difficult topics, and we do it in a way that allows people to feel safe and be able to ask questions. But not everyone learns like that, so we've got a film series where we screen either a short film or a documentary series on different topics and have a hosted conversation. We do a book club series because some people prefer to do that kind of format. But we're trying to create a situation where if you are interested in learning about different cultures or perspectives, it would be hard to not at our agency right now. And so it's just interesting in a bunch of different ways. I would tell you though, what's interesting, you talk about mentorship. I actually used to work for James. I did, and I worked at Donor, and they brought him in from New York, and I remember early on in my career, he was telling me and the rest of the folks that worked for him that we don't have enough female creative. And he talked about the benefit of having a perspective from a female creative and how their work would get better and how they think differently and how they apply a different design eye to it. And to me, that was mentoring in a very deliberate way about saying, you know, people that are thinking about this, we got to do something about this. And so early on in my career, he was one that actually showed me a fair amount of this.
I'm really glad you said that, because you could have said a lot of other horrible things. But no, I am glad. I joined Donor in 2003. I spent the first part of my career at McCann in New York, and you know, I was exposed to a lot of really charismatic, brilliant women. And despite the fact that McCann at the time might have been perceived as kind of a masculine culture, and one of the things that I heard really early on from Nina DeSessa, who was our chief creative officer for a long time at McCann, and she said to me, she said, you know, men think and women feel. And it was one of those simple things, and it's a little bit absolute, but I went with it, and it really just kind of opened my eyes that, you know, there's a whole other way, and this has been touched on a lot this morning, there's a whole other way to experience the world, to interpret the world. It's no less valid than mine. But that was really eye-opening, and it stuck with me. And I think, you know, as Kevin was saying, part of the way to get men into this, given that we are thinkers, is to do what's been done today, is to equate equality with a business imperative. That we suck as an agency if we aren't treating gender equally, and if we aren't equally represented by a female perspective and a male perspective. We'll do a worse job for our clients, we'll make less money. So it's not just socially and morally the right thing to do, it just makes good business sense. So, and I think everybody's sort of energized around it right now. I don't think there's any laggards who are saying, no, this isn't right. I mean, everybody's down with the cause. It's just translating being down into taking action.
Right. Yeah. And your comment, you're right, it's not absolute.
No.
Because we all know a lot of people who are on the other side of that.
It's a continuum, but sometimes you need a kind of, you know, lead pipe over the head statement like that to make you think differently. And obviously it was effective for me at the time, and it's stuck with me, you know, and kind of informed what I said to Kevin when we started working together.
You know, what you said that was interesting to me is that you got to go take action. I think there's a lot of people that are I call them like the observers. They observe the problem. Boy, there's a real problem with female creative leadership. You know, then you got people that are like the pontificators. Like, I wonder where it stems from. You know, and then you got people that are just going to go do something. You know, and so what we learned at our agency is that observing or pontificating is not great without action. And so how do we be deliberate with our actions? Right. And what we're realizing is that the same way we talk about women don't always feel comfortable asking for a pay raise or don't feel comfortable thinking they're qualified for a position, when a man would be like, I'll do that. Tell them, like, give me that job. I'll take it right now. And they're not qualified at all. And so when we have open positions at the agency, we used to say, hey, refer friends, people you know, people from different agencies, whatever. What we started saying is, like, if you're and we do a call every 2 weeks with all the sort of mid-level managers at our agency, and we say, we have these open positions, and if you're managing people, think about the background where they came from, and not everyone's going to raise their hand. As a manager, you need to tap them on the shoulder saying, I think you can do this. I think you should raise your hand for this job, and we're being more deliberate about that, and little things like that are making a difference for us, as opposed to saying, we've always given people permission, but permission is not enough. Some people need a tap on the shoulder to say, we actually want you to do this.
Absolutely.
That's well put. You know, I was thinking, this was completely accidental, but last night I happened to watch an episode of A Handmaid's Tale. And if you need a fresh dose of outrage to get ready for a session like this, it was perfect. And again, there's this sort of serendipity that happened. But yeah, and I think, look, the interesting thing about this debate or this topic is that, yes, there are quantitative aspects of it, but there are also just qualitative aspects of it. And I think a lot can be said for just listening, because I think as a life skill, you know, so many of us, instead of truly listening, we just wait to interject whatever our brilliance is. You know, we're sort of just biding our time. And I think developing the reflex to really listen mindfully and with presence is good across the board, but particularly as it relates to listening to perspectives that are different than my own, whether that's a cultural difference or a gender difference. And so that's something, that's a small thing, a micro action, I suppose, that I try and practice, albeit imperfectly, you know, every day.
So you talked about Nina. I'm sure there are other women that in your career, both of you, were inspirational?
Yeah, Nina was certainly one of them, but Happily McCann was just one of those places, and it's all I knew before I came to Donor, but it was a place where there was just a group of kind of alpha females who were, the whole package, just charismatic, brilliant, inspiring. One of my colleagues at the time, Devika Bulchandani, who's the chief strategist there now and had a lot to do with the Fearless Girl thing. Leslie Sims, who's now chief creative at Y&R. So I just was, through good fortune, exposed to some really inspiring women. And my only sibling is a sister, and she's amazing and an alpha female as well. So I think I came into the business world with the right predisposition at least, and just working to get better and better.
How about you?
I worked for mostly women in my career. Monica Teisel's here, Lisa Nardona's here. People that really taught me how to do my job really, really well. And then at some point I stopped working for women and I didn't see a lot of women around me, and that was weird to me. Like, I learned how to do this business based on women teaching me how to do this business better, and James. But he's very empathetic though. And so, I was privileged in that way to see that perspective and see how to take it, and I think that helped me understand, how when I have the opportunity to affect change, how to actually do that in a way that's going to be beneficial. And so, when I took over recently for the agency, we changed a lot of our leadership team out, and that's why we're able to have female leadership representing the agency, because it wasn't always like that. And I think the story that got told earlier about the person that interviewed at an agency might have been our agency, so I apologize for that. I'm not supposed to say I'm sorry, but I think you interviewed at our agency at that point. So
is that Karen? Karen,
yeah. But it's different, and so, what I saw was, we didn't look right at the top. And as opposed to observing it, we changed it. And very, very proud to say that, we're over 105 years old as an agency, and we promoted our first female chief creative officer last year, and she's here, Jo Shoesmith. She's in the back. She actually did mentoring today. So very happy that that's the case here, but 105 years without a female chief creative officer is just a fact that you can't escape. And so that was the right move to make at the time, and we're better off for it.
Great.
I just think, too, to revisit the topic of empathy, which is well-plowed ground today. Sometimes in strategy we talk about the value of empathy over insight, because oftentimes when you hear the word insight, it creates an expectation that it's something totally novel that no one's ever heard before. And a lot of the times, the shit that masquerades as insight is not terribly insightful. But empathy is sometimes an underappreciated virtue in strategy, and sometimes that's what it's all about, is just understanding the feelings as opposed to the thought process of your target, and finding that kind of radical empathy. And just to reiterate, to the extent that we practice that as practitioners of what we do for a living, we got to treat each other that way as well. So that's the big discussion right now. And I think empathy is a powerful word, and it sidesteps some of the political correctness that accompanies the words like diversity. It's just a different way to think about it, and I know Madonna spoke about it quite a bit earlier. I like the concept a lot.
I think that's a nice thread to really help push, specific things we can do to really help help bring a more diverse culture into our everyday. And I think that's an interesting question for you two is, do you wake up every morning and think about this and how you're going to change your agency?
I can't help but think about it because I live in an all estrogen environment at home, so it's thrust upon me. But no, it would be insincere to say that I think about doing the right thing right when I get out of bed, but having daughters has been a really eye-opening experience for me because there's a limit to which I can project myself onto my daughters, and I recognize aspects of myself in them, but I really think that having them has given me kind of skin in the game. So it's not just intellectual, it's not just ethical. It's something that I feel deeply because like I said before, these girls are going to be making their way through this world, so I got to help make it a good place for them to make it.
Yeah, similar. First thing in the morning, my kids got to brush their teeth, and that's always a challenge. So after I get done with that, we get to the agency, and it is an everyday thing. I mean, because what I've seen a lot, and I'm sure y'all see this, is that companies are really good at implementing new policies or a new procedure or a new this or new that, and then people go, don't worry about it. 3 months later, it's going to be dropped, and we're not going to worry about that thing anymore. And so what I saw is that. leadership of the agency's commitment to this is not something you can state. You just can't have a goal. You have to like every day be pushing towards this and reintroducing different topics and different ways to think about to the agency. Because if not, people think that you've lost interest. Even if you are doing, by all measures, what feels like pretty well in this regard, if you stop talking about it, if you stop creating programming, stop acting on it, people feel like we're no longer worrying about that, which it's not the case. You know, I think it's one of those things, if you stop, it's like exercise. If you stop, you're not going to be, you have to keep going once you do it. There's no like mission accomplished aircraft carrier moment with George W. Bush. You know, you got to keep going. You know, you got to keep doing it every single day. So we try every day.
Well, the great thing is, you know, beyond the policy things and the big sort of attention-getting events, I mean, we all have an opportunity with every interaction to practice what we preach. And so it's as simple as, do I consciously listen to what someone across the table is saying and stop and really contemplate their point of view and perspective wherever it stems from, and instead of just, you know, clinging to my own natural reflexes and conventions. So, you know, some days the efforts are more extracurricular and grand, and in other instances it's just about how we treat one another, you know.
Mm-hmm. So before we go to questions, we'll go to questions shortly, so start thinking about them. What advice would you give the men in the room and then the women here who go back to their agencies and their places of business to tell them, you know, what's going to make them successful in really bringing diversity to the forefront?
Well, you know, I harp on this a bit, and it seems maybe simplistic, but what I would say to the men is listen without prejudice. You know, and because I think sometimes, and again, I don't think, I know no one in our building has any kind of bad agenda, but sometimes we fall into reflexes where we're not really listening in an unbiased way. That's I guess the concept of unconscious bias. So I would encourage men to kind of consciously think about that and try and stop it in its tracks, because it's going to rear its head. And what I would say to women too, you know, is there was a quote I read from Maya Angelou, and I loved it because it was so sort of irreverent, but she said, and I might butcher the quote, I apologize, Maya, if you're out there, but what she said was, hey, the world, I love it when a young girl grabs the world by the lapels, because the world's a crazy place and you got to go out and kick ass. And I think that's right. I mean, I see it in my own daughters, who are all very feisty and alpha female in their own way, but like, I can see in them in the classroom, sometimes there's a reflex not to be as outspoken as their male peers, you know, and that's real, you know, and I wouldn't have understood that as vividly had I not had daughters to see it with.
Yeah, I think seriously, the Manbassador bingo card is a great way to sort of, as a simple talking point or a tool or device to give to men at the agency. Just think about, you know, what can you do every single day to do this? Give someone a microphone. You know, don't interrupt them. Have them see the table. Those are things that over time, if your agency is not as a woman treating you the right way or listening to your ideas, you're going to find a better place to work. Truly, a better place to work than that. So I think for men, it's like, just think about, you know, your ingoing assumptions about how you think and the way you, if I speak louder, people listen to me. Not everyone does that. And how can these micro actions help you to act differently? And then I think for women, you know, I talked to Joe Shoesmith about this yesterday, and I said, you know, how do, you know, women in an agency get their ideas heard by a chief creative officer or by an ECD? And she said it's not even about women, it's about sort of junior creative talent in general. It's not about women. You know, most times the juniors are not given an opportunity to hear their voice. And she said, you just got to be louder. You just got to raise your hand and ask for a brief. And what was interesting, she then talked about, is that ask for briefs that might not be traditionally in your wheelhouse. Like we talked about earlier about, they said people that were women got packaged goods assignments and women didn't get on car accounts. You know, it's fun. We talked about, you know, we have women that are working on the Harley-Davidson brief right now and men that are working on Snuggle fabric softener, because that diversity of background of thinking is going to make both those campaigns better. And so if you're a woman here, go and ask for a better brief. Go ask for a cool assignment that might have been traditionally men and say, I can bring new perspective to this, and I think you'll like my ideas. And so I would just say, you know, everything you've learned today is real, and go apply that in your workforce and ask for those assignments.
Fantastic. Yep. All right. So we'd like to open it up for questions, because we wanted to make this a very interactive session and something that you really got a chance to learn from our Manbassadors.
You spoke of sort of the you spoke of sort of like the empathy that comes from being a father of daughters. So I was kind of wondering, like, as college students, what are some ways that we could encourage the males in our classes and our peers who are like, 20, 21-year-old guys to take an active stance as an ambassador without that encouragement of having, daughters, or maybe they don't have sisters, or they don't like their mothers, who knows? But so how do you do that? Or
I assume that it begins with starting where there's receptivity, because any kind of big cultural change can be pretty daunting. It can be pretty mysterious. But start with the guys who you know the best, and be direct in terms of confronting it, not in a hostile way, but because if they embrace what you're saying, then they're likely to endorse it to somebody else. But I think any change movement begins with the people who are going to be most predisposed to listen to it. And I'd like to think that college is a time when people are particularly open-minded anyway. And what I see too, my eldest is a sophomore in high school now, but what thrills me is that her and her peers, they're so much more enlightened about the world than certainly when I was a teenager. So again, I think just start simple. Start with who you know, and create a movement. It just starts with a catalyst, right?
This question is for both of you, but at what point, if you could pinpoint or give an example of a point where you were able to measure your impact on creating this level playing field or this diversity, was there anything that you've done where you looked back on it and said, wow, I really am making an impact now, that was big?
You want to
start? Sure, I'll check that. I don't think there's a simple, there was an inflection point for what I saw. It wasn't like something was broken and it fixed and now it works. But what we saw at our agency was, any move we made that was in the right direction had better impact. So promoting the right person for the job, in this case, a woman to be a CD, how that work would get better. How when we show up to new business pitches, we wouldn't have 8 men and a woman in the pitch and think that that's cool. And so we would have pitches that were equal men and women, and we'd win more. So it wasn't like a moment where the light bulb went on, but you build on success. Like anything, you try something, you make some effort, you see some success, you build on that, more effort, more success. And it sort of happened like that for us. It wasn't like a specific moment, but you have to in those moments say, why did we win that business? Or why did we win that award? Or why did we whatever? And you would trace it back to a number of things, and oftentimes because that was a less homogenous group that was working on it. So it's just building on those things and calling them out as successes then.
So I think Kevin's able to respond to it on kind of an institutional level and a quantitative level. The way I'd try and answer this is qualitatively and individually. What I've really enjoyed is moments when people who have worked underneath me, and women in particular, have given me the feedback that I'm making a positive difference for them. There's a woman who left us not too long ago to go pursue a graduate degree, and she asked me to write a letter for her to help her get into this program. And there had never ever been any conscious discussion of gender once when we worked together. But the feedback that she gave me was very powerful in terms of doing the right thing by her, listening to her, empowering her. So I think anytime you feel as though you can make a difference in an individual's life, you're doing the right thing. And if more people do the right thing, then slowly but surely institutional change happens.
There's one way back there.
Yeah.
All right. Has either of you ever been in a situation where a client was asking you to do something that you knew was either objectifying women or inappropriate toward women or minorities? And if so, what did you do? Or if not, how would you advise people under you to deal with those situations?
Well, this doesn't fit the bill perfectly. I had a client, and this is years ago in New York, who was making insensitive remarks about gay people, and one of the art directors on the business was a gay guy. And look, it's a weird dynamic. I was an account guy at the time, and it's an awkward moment, I suppose, when you have to take a client and pull them aside and say, what I said was, and I tried to be polite but firm about it, and say, look, you just need to stop and think about this. You don't realize it, but I'll leave the name out, is gay. And, and what I try and do is assume positive intent. I assume that that guy wasn't a homophobe, that he was just being ignorant and insensitive. But I did that. It wasn't especially comfortable, particularly because I was like 26 at the time, and this was an older guy. But it needed to be done. So it wasn't about a piece of work, but it was about a colleague. And I think, you just have to, if you have sort of realism and conviction on your side, there's nothing you can't say.
I haven't had a situation I can think of where the client was pushing towards objectification of women, thankfully. I have had difficult conversations with clients in the past where when race came up, and I will say it's a really odd industry we work on and it's always casting is the problem. We talked about this morning. Like at some point you're looking at a mix of people and you say who would go together as a fictitious family.
Right.
And then you would try to cast what America looks like, a biracial family or something, and clients sometimes would say, I don't think our customers want that, and we're like, your customers are that, and so you have that moment where, not in a large room, what I would say the same thing you did, James, is you don't do that in the front of all that person's peers. You figure out a different time to have that, saying, listen, A, it's not the right thing to do, but B, it's better for business. Like you have to reflect what America looks like, and your view of what America looks like is not what America really looks like, and you have that moment, and it's not confrontational for the sake of confrontation. It's more about education, and you put it, like James said about your question too, put it in the context of business and success. And so I've had a few of those conversations over the years, and they're never fun, but it ultimately helps them, and then the client most times say, I didn't think of it that way. I wasn't trying to be malicious or trying to be bigoted. I just didn't know any better, and thank you for calling me on that. And so to me, it's you stand up for what you believe in, and clients will come and go. We all know that, but your moral compass is the one thing that you keep with you. So try to follow.
I think that's right. It helps you sleep at night better to know, because you don't have to go out and be a crusader, but if you see something wrong, to not comment on it, that's going to stick with you. And so it always feels better to confrontation, not in the worst sense of the word, but positive confrontation always feels better than apathy, I think.
And I have a really good story. So early on in my career, I was working for an automotive supplier, and they were located in France. And we had put together, it was early in the 2000s when we put together a whole idea to help them figure out how to use the internet. And so I was the one who led the team and was going over to present. And our client here said, I don't think the CEO is going to appreciate a woman presenting. And my boss was intent on me presenting, and I went there, and it was an incredible experience, and they listened, and we actually moved forward with the project. So having people like yourselves in those positions to say, this needs to happen because it's the right thing for the work, it's the right thing for you, client, is really important. Other questions? One way back there.
Thank you. I've had the fortune to work in a good number of environments where I think equality wasn't necessarily sort of looked at or expected as much as it was a byproduct of positive thinking, where I feel as though everyone who was involved ultimately, it ended up, as I say, a byproduct of their positivity, and it ended up being the right, not only the right thing to do, but it just came out almost kind of intuitively. I find in a lot of cases when we're looking at programs, it seems somewhat insincere at moments where people are sort of instituting a certain way of thinking within organizations, and it doesn't feel genuine. It feels like it's mandated, and it feels like because they're trying to make a cultural shift. But ultimately, I want to know what you believe we can do to actually make a paradigm shift where people are doing this, not because they have to, but because they genuinely feel passionate about it, because I feel that's sort of the way I've operated myself in the past, where I feel as though I've made decisions that I think aren't necessarily what's going to make everyone happy necessarily, because I genuinely feel it's the right way to go. So rather than it just be an insincere motion, what do you think we can do in order to actually make an official cultural shift, something that's more deliberate?
Well, there's an expression I've always liked, that practice becomes habit and habit becomes character, that's how change occurs. That to change, I may have to practice something that's counterintuitive, but if I do it deliberately and hard enough, that I habituate it, and then without my even being aware of it, character changes. And I think that you can extrapolate out to the institution as well. A lot of this, and I don't mean to oversimplify it, but for me, it begins with interactions with coworkers. There are things we can do on an institutional scale. We're trying to, we should, we won't stop. But when the sort of luster of the big statement fades, what are you doing the next day at work in terms of your interactions? And I think it's just, again, I don't mean to reduce it, but I think it's mindfulness, practicing what might be counterintuitive, and doing it until you change.
I think a couple pieces in your question, the one thing is like, are you just changing culture for the sake of changing culture? And in our case, we were deliberately changing culture at our agency. But the way we did it that hopefully folks that work at our shop feel is that we approached it from a top-down and bottom-up. So from a top-down perspective, we as leaders said this is important to us. And I think we talked about this morning, if you're not working towards something, any path will do, right? That's a line that we heard. So providing some vision and direction for the agency is saying, we think this is what we should stand for and how we should show up in market and the kind of people we would like to attract to work here. If we could set that vision at the highest level, and then we provide the support, time, money, commitment for our folks at each one of our offices from the bottom up to organize and create custom programming. And so what we do every time, we have people that broadcast programming from Detroit to our New York and Los Angeles office, and sometimes LA to New York and Detroit. But that's coming from the employees themselves. It's not us saying, here's a PowerPoint presentation, I want you to read that. It's programming that came out of those offices by the people that found passion in it already. All we did was provide a North Star and then some ground for them to explore. So that's how we try to do it in a way that felt a little bit more genuine as opposed to just corporate mission statement and we read it before every meeting. We try to make it a little bit more real.
I think too, you mentioned the power of positive thinking, and agencies can be cynical places. I can become a cynic at any given moment, and while not every cynic is a misogynist or a bigot, sometimes cynicism can lead to bad behavior. So part of it is root out cynicism. As a leader, I think it's incumbent on all of us to sort of exemplify the behavior that we want other people to model. So when I sort of slip into cynicism, I try and check myself, sometimes unsuccessfully.
I would say making it part of the work. So really building your teams in a multidisciplinary way. So that brings out the diversity, because you're going to get diversity through that. And then making sure that on those multidisciplinary teams, there is diversity. We recently created a team, we call it the Growth Ensemble. So the idea of an acting ensemble or a musical ensemble, that they come together and they work in concert, was the whole point of bringing together diverse ways of thinking, and then you get that diversity.
Have you guys ever used inclusion or diversity or commitment to not objectify women in any of your approaches to lure talents to your agency? Has that ever been a factor in hiring or like
It
the
hasn't.
access package, right? That's always a big sell, but is that something that we would want to expand on?
Look, I was intrigued by the 3% certification, as a sort of trust mark for what we do. I mean, that to me is a great idea. We have not done that to my knowledge, but that seems like the kind of thing. Yeah, all right, I'm down.
Yes, we're all down.
So our CFO's here somewhere. He can make it happen. I can't do anything. But that, no. So I'm not aware of anything, but the principle of it is really, really intriguing, and I think a good idea.
Yeah, likewise. We haven't overtly done that in a recruitment effort, but I'm intrigued by it. I think, like making a statement, like Madonna said earlier, that, from now on, we're not going to do this as an agency. Just, even having a North Star like that is a great way to, again, provide vision for people saying, if you like this kind of thinking, you'll like it here. And if not, you won't like it here. And it is a good filter to put on it. So we have not, but I do like the idea of it for sure.
So this is a two-part question. One being, what have you done as an agency to make sure that everybody in all ethnicities, all races, everybody, gender, know that their voices are equal? And what would you tell to the people that sometimes don't feel like their voice is being heard? And how do you empower them to actually speak up and be heard?
You want to go?
Sure. how do we empower them? So I think it's probably similar to what I said earlier about like, women, minorities, and then a lot of times it's just people that are new in their career often think that their ideas are not worthwhile. And so what we try to do is create a system where there's formats for that to happen, so you don't feel like you're a mile away from a decision maker. We intentionally flattened our agency structure so there's fewer layers of people between making decisions and people that are doing, because we're all doing now. And so to me, it's asking for it as a young person, as a person of color, as a woman, whatever you think that is why someone doesn't value your opinion. Some of that might be self-imposed, and some of that could be the perception of people around you that don't look like you. And so I would just say, the best you can, make sure you raise your hand and say, I have ideas, and then find a good outlet for that. And so traditionally in large companies, you'll find maybe a creative director or an ACD that might be more receptive to and or have a passion in mentoring or bringing along young talent. Find those folks. And then more importantly, what we see is that, you have to be your own best advocate too. Raise your hand and say, I need some help with this. I have some ideas and I don't know where to go to get them heard. And you'll find people that will gravitate towards you because they know you're asking the question. And you'll find those people as the people that are going to be the sort of shepherds for you throughout this field of trying to find your idea heard. But it starts by saying, I have ideas, I don't know where to take it. And then people will typically gravitate towards you. If not, try to seek someone out because they're pretty easy to find. Once you get in an agency, you'll figure out, hey, these folks are better at listening to ideas. And so I'd say try to find those outlets.
I think that's well said, and I mentioned it earlier. We have a Diversity and Inclusion Council, which is relatively recently created, but so now we have a mechanism and a forum for people to speak their piece. And then I think also just on an individual level, I think empathy is a two-way street, right? And for people who are feeling unheard or ignored, it's wrong to presume that someone's doing it deliberately. I think we all have to assume positive intent with each other, and so it's just as important for someone to let me know how they're feeling if they're concerned that I'm not seeing the world their way, because none of us is a mind reader. But I think if we start, again, with the assumption that no one has bad intentions, good things are possible.
Okay. I think we have time for one more question, way in the back there.
Thanks. My question actually sprang to mind when you mentioned sort of working under Nina DeSessa. Nina is a friend of mine, and while Nina is a vibrant and very sexy woman, Nina is also the coolest guy in the room.
No doubt.
All the guys would just as soon be Nina as be themselves. And it made me wonder, when you're including women, when you are promoting women, whether you notice or pay attention to it all, or whether it has occurred to you to encourage them to also do their jobs in a womanly way, to bring womanly qualities into the process, such as being more nurturing, being more collaborative, all of things that really help out in getting the best work out of people.
Well, I think someone who was up here previously put it very well, saying be your whole authentic self at the office. And there was a chart that was up earlier that suggested that a lot of the great leadership attributes are much more traditionally, female attributes. I take your point. Nina was a force of nature. I mean, she had a unique way about her and was able to navigate a very masculine culture, and and I think it paved the way for a lot of good things. But so no, I can't think of a specific example. But I think, again, as long as we're encouraging one another to be their whole authentic self at the office, that's probably a good start. And I know we're going to wrap it up, but I'm thrilled to have been asked to be a Manbassador. I'm told there's a sash, and I'm looking forward to getting the sash.
I wasn't offering a sash.
But okay. I feel objectified. But also really proud to be part of Donor, because we're doing a lot of good things, and I love the turnout that we had at this event. So thank you very much. And
yeah, thanks for having me.
Big round of applause.